Good evening to everyone and welcome to today's session. In the last session we have discussed Edison's, Crohn's, diabetes in the endocrinology, which are the most premium topics for the examiner. So in the today's session we are going to have the remaining topics: Cushing's, testicular feminization syndrome. One of the favorite topic is congenital adrenal hyperplasia, about which you need to know everything on the planet. And it is one topic where it is linked with biochemistry and congenital adrenal hyperplasia. A lot of students struggle to link between the medicine and the biochemistry. We will end that struggle for you. So we welcome our online students, Dr. Neena and Vinod, Amrita, etc., etc. So, very good. Dr. Tejus also is today online. I hope that you all have opened the Edmodo account. In the edmodo.com, we created accounts for you. There you have done the polling. I am very happy to know that. So that the job of a teacher is to give you some assignment, you solve it. Every day you are kept in a tuning to prepare in the momentum, and ultimately you will perform if you really prepare every day a small percentage. So let us make the start. Cushing's, as you know, what are the 10 points you need to know about Cushing for entrance? It is the clinical state of increased glucocorticoid. Most commonly we give steroids for a lot of reasons. Nephrotic syndrome, SLE patients, etc., etc. In all those scenarios, it is that iatrogenically administered steroid which is responsible for the Cushing's in a good number of occasions. This is a typical appearance. So when a patient walks into your clinic, by the look itself, you must be in a position to identify the Cushing's. There can be a problem in the pituitary where there is an increased production of the ACTH, and if at all the Cushing's occur because of the pituitary problem, then it is called as Cushing's disease. And there can be ectopic non-pituitary ACTH producing tumor elsewhere in the body, which is producing ACTH like effect and leading to the development of the glucocorticoid excess production. There can be an adrenal tumor, or there can be a hyperplasia in the adrenal, which can lead to the development of excessive amount of endogenous cortisol secretion, which is also another important possible cause of the Cushing. Now there are certain hormones in our body, GIP, LH and catecholamines. Any aberrant expression of the receptors of these hormones also can lead to the excessive production of the glucocorticoids, which is basically called as ACTH independent Cushing's, is what you have to basically remember. So we have Dr. Neena and others who have logged in after finishing Edmodo polling of the today's quiz. From tomorrow onwards, we will try to give more number of questions for you to poll, and we have a discussion on the questions. So that way it becomes much more interactive. Now, what are the causes of Cushing's? It can be ACTH dependent disease or non-ACTH dependent disease. Both two ways of producing hypercortisolism. ACTH dependent means if the pituitary is overproducing ACTH and that is causing hypercortisolism, you call it as pituitary dependent, which is ACTH dependent. Ectopic ACTH producing tumors, or if you are administering ACTH, any of them. There is adrenal adenomas, adrenal carcinomas and glucocorticoid, if you are giving iatrogenically, they are all non-ACTH dependent causes of the Cushing's, is what you need to basically remember. In some people who regularly take alcohol, you have the Cushing appearance. So that is called alcohol-induced pseudo-Cushingoid appearance is what need to be remembered. Now, yeah, this is another classical appearance. The purple striae, presence of hirsutism along with a buffalo hump is the classical unmistakable appearance of how a Cushing looks like, is spotted in the endocrinology in the final year MBBS exam. So a moon face, plethora, depression, hirsutism, frontal balding, kyphosis, buffalo hump, we had been studying right from our 8th class how a Cushing's appear like. Even in CBSE biology we studied. There is a central obesity, very important. Proximal myopathy. Excess steroids will lead to development of proximal myopathy. There can be poor wound healing, development of pigmentation, hypertension. One of the endocrine causes of the hypertension you should never forget is Cushing's. And excessive steroids will be responsible for the development of osteoporosis. There can be development of pathological fractures which can involve the vertebrae and ribs. Now doctor, how do you make the diagnosis? Very good. Looking at the patient, you suspected that Cushing's. How will you make? If you do randomly collect the blood sample and send for serum cortisol to see whether there is any high cortisol, it is of no use. So random cortisol has no use. We do 48-hour low dose dexamethasone suppression test. Normal people, if you administer dexamethasone, then they will suppress their plasma cortisol production to less than 50 nanomoles per liter. But if the patient is having Cushing syndrome and if there is a hypercortisolism, they fail to show the suppression if you happen to administer them the dexamethasone. And it is highly sensitive. More than 97% of people who have Cushing's will show 48-hour dexamethasone suppression test positivity. And there is two ways of carrying out the dexamethasone suppression test. One is 48-hour dexamethasone, other is overnight dexamethasone. But overnight dexamethasone has a higher false positive rate. Even the people who don't have Cushing's also may turn out to be positive. Thus reason 48-hour low dose dexamethasone suppression test is the ideal one. Then 24-hour you collect the urinary free cortisol measurements. This is one of the simple way of catching up a hypercortisolism individual, but this is less reliable. Now circadian rhythm. Generally you make the patient get admitted after 48 hours, you take the cortisol sample at 9 AM and also at midnight, 12 o'clock, without telling the patient that you are collecting it for that purpose. Normal people there is a circadian variation, whereas those who have a Cushing syndrome, the midnight cortisol levels will be very high. Generally by midnight, we don't expect cortisol to be high. We expect early morning sample to have cortisol to be high. So this loss of the circadian variation is another way to detect the presence of normally midnight you expect it to become low, but instead if it is high even in the midnight 12 o'clock also, then it is another important indication that there is Cushing's. Then midnight salivary cortisol which is being collected at the home also will give you a very important clue. Now doctor, how do you identify a ectopic ACTH producing individual? See, ACTH can come excessively from pituitary or ectopically produced ACTH also can be there. If the history is short and if there is pigmentation and weight loss because of the, generally ectopic ACTH is because of cancer. Cancer leads to the development of weight loss. But generally Cushing's people will have weight gain. So hypercortisolism with the history of weight loss means you should think of whether any ectopic ACTH is the underlying cause. Any unprovoked hypokalemia, because all that excessive corticosteroid will have a mineralocorticoid effect and that lead to kaliuresis and development of hypokalemia. and their plasma ACTH levels will be more than 200 nanograms per liter. Most of these ectopic tumors are benign and they can mimic the pituitary disease of Cushing's very closely and biochemically also. Then is there any clue from the history to say that this patient of hypercortisolism is having the source of that excess production directly due to an adrenal hyperplasia or adrenal tumor? Is there any clue to say? If the cause is not pituitary, if the cause is not ectopic ACTH, if the cause is directly from the adrenal, a good number of times adrenal, in addition to steroid, will also produce adrenal androgens. And that excess adrenal androgen production will lead to signs of hirsutism and virilization, which is highly suggestive of adrenal tumor, is what you have to basically remember. We do an adrenal CT, MRI, in order to identify whether there is any problem of adrenal adenoma. Now, one common challenge that occurs when tomorrow you are a radiologist, MD radiology, is it adrenal adenoma or adrenal carcinoma? Is there any clue radiologically? If it is adrenal carcinomas, they are typically large sized and irregular in outline, along with the signs of the infiltration and metastasis, which is a very important clue. And if you find bilateral adrenal hyperplasia in a patient of hypercortisolism, what is it an important clue to? Typically it is an important clue to say there is excessive ACTH production by the pituitary. When our pituitary is producing excessive ACTH, then bilateral adrenal hyperplasia will develop in them. So they are the ways by which you need to pick up the clue. So we know how to evaluate a patient radiologically. Now plasma potassium is a very important investigation. Hypokalemia is very common, especially when there is ectopic ACTH production. Hypokalemia is much more common out of the three causes. What are the three causes? Pituitary ACTH, ectopic ACTH, and adrenal by itself producing excessive steroids like an adrenal adenoma. Between the three, it is the ectopic ACTH more likely to be associated with hypokalemia. Then what we do is a high dose dexamethasone suppression test. Typically, if there is no failure, if there is no suppression, that means there is a failure of suppression, then what is it very important clue to say? It says that either it is an ectopic ACTH or it is an adrenal tumor. Both of them, dexamethasone suppression it fails to suppress their steroid production. If you give high dose dexamethasone, if the steroid is suppressed, that means the source is basically from pituitary cause of hypercortisolism. This is a very important distinction. Lot of times questions come only on this very, very important point. We can also directly do the ACTH levels in the plasma. Suppose if there are low or undetectable levels of the ACTH, then that means to say it is basically either adrenal adenoma excessively producing steroid or it is ectopic ACTH responsible. Then we do the corticotropin CRH releasing factor. So even CRH test we do. So whenever you give the ACTH stimulating factor which comes from hypothalamus, if there is an exaggerated ACTH and cortisol response to the exogenous CRH which you have administered, that means that there is a pituitary dependent Cushing's because ectopic ACTH is not stimulated by your exogenous CRH. So summarize, doctor. If you give dexamethasone suppression, if there is a suppression of the steroid production, that means to say the problem is lying with, if there is a failure of suppression, the problem is lying with either adrenal or ectopic ACTH. If there is suppression with high dose dexamethasone, problem is there with the pituitary. Then if you give CRH exogenously, If it is able to stimulate ACTH production, that means pituitary is the underlying cause. That is how we reach the conclusion. We can also do inferior petrosal, we go to the inferior petrosal sinus, we do the catheterization directly and measure the ACTH, and in any elevation of the ACTH in the inferior petrosal sinus venous blood sample is another important clue to say that it is the source is coming from the pituitary. We can also do radio labeled octreotide so that it can be able to locate the ectopic source of the ACTH production. Then this is the typical algorithm which you should not forget when you go to the tomorrow's exam. You have a suspected case of Cushing's. Overnight 1 milligram dexamethasone suppression test, or generally 48-hour dexamethasone suppression test you will do. If the cortisol gets suppressed, it is less than 1.8 micrograms per liter. That means there is no Cushing's. If it is more than 1.8 not suppressed, then you will do 24-hour urinary cortisol. If the 24-hour urinary cortisol is increased, then that is definitely a case of Cushing's. Suppose 24-hour urinary cortisol levels is normal, then we do 11 midnight salivary cortisol levels. If they are elevated also, it is a clue to say that there is Cushing's. And if it is normal, we can rule out that there is no Cushing's. Now, after that, what will you do? This is about the overnight low dose suppression test. After that, you do plasma ACTH levels and high dose dexamethasone suppression test. If you give high dose dexamethasone suppression, then if there is suppression and if the ACTH levels are elevated, that means it is the pituitary cause, which is called Cushing's disease. Suppose if there is lack of suppression and the ACTH levels are low, that means there is a adrenal, which is the underlying cause of the Cushing's. And suppose if there is a high ACTH and there is no suppression, that means it is an ectopic cause of the ACTH syndrome. Suppose if the results are equivocal, then you need to do inferior petrosal venous sampling and the CRH stimulation test. If the CRH stimulation test is done, if there is an exaggerated release of the ACTH, that means to say that there is a Cushing's disease is what you will basically conclude. So finally, how do you treat the patient? After making the diagnosis is a very, very important issue. Generally, if you don't treat, Cushing's has a very bad prognosis. All the DEXA steroids will lead to hypertension, MI, infection, heart failure, etc., etc. So you can give metirapone, which is 11 hydroxylase blocker. You can give ketoconazole, which can have effects in conjunction with metirapone in order to suppress the steroid levels. Then you can give aminoglutamide and trilostane, which will inhibit the 3-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase. And you need to monitor the patient's plasma cortisol to see that a good control is achieved. When do you call good control? If the mean level during the day has come down to 150 to 300 nanomoles per liter. Then if it is a Cushing's disease where the source is from the pituitary, then you need to do transsphenoidal removal of the tumor, which is considered to be the treatment of choice for the Cushing's disease, where the pituitary adenoma is responsible for the hypercortisolism. You can also do external pituitary irradiation if your transsphenoidal surgery is unable to solve the problem. Especially pediatric population, they will respond very well if you happen to use the radiotherapy in order to suppress the pituitary tumor. And the last resort to manage a patient is to do a bilateral adrenalectomy, but that is only a last choice is what you need to remember. So, finally we need to know one very important entity before we call it off. What is meant by Nelson's syndrome? Suppose if you happen to do the adrenalectomy in any patient, normally adrenal produces steroid, steroid will cause the suppression of the ACTH production. If you remove the adrenal, then there is no suppression on the pituitary. There is no inhibition on the pituitary. Pituitary continuously will be producing ACTH. Every time ACTH is produced, there is a production of melanocyte stimulating hormone, and hence patients will develop a enlarging pituitary tumor along with the hyperpigmentation after you have done the adrenalectomy, which is called as the Nelson syndrome. So it typically occurs in about 1/5 of patients in whom bilateral adrenalectomy is done for the Cushing's disease. So how can you prevent it? Once you have done bilateral adrenalectomy, you need to irradiate the pituitary to prevent the development of the Nelson syndrome is what need to be remembered. If the Nelson syndrome has developed already, then that enlarged pituitary need to be removed by pituitary surgery and you need to do the radiotherapy. So that's all the story that you need to know. What is the dexamethasone suppression test? How do you use to differential diagnosis of the various underlying entities? If at all examiner asks one question, that question will be only on dexamethasone suppression test. I hope you have understood it very clearly and lucidly. Now, doctor, the next important topic we are going to talk for today's evening will be multiple endocrine neoplasia. There will be about one question. Generally around 6 to 7 questions come in endocrinology out of 30 questions. If it is the same NEET pattern for the next November also, then you will have about 20 in medicine. One of them is multiple endocrine neoplasia. Typical inheritance is autosomal dominant, and the affected person is capable of passing on the mutation to their offspring through the germ cell. Suppose as a father of a child, if the patient developed a mutation, then that mutation at the time of spermatogenesis will pass on to the newborn baby. Then the baby who is born with that will not show any chance of MEN, multiple endocrine neoplasia. When will the baby who received the germ cell mutation will show multiple endocrine neoplasia? Suppose during the lifetime of that baby, if there is one more somatic mutation, one is through germline he received one mutant, and other during his lifetime he got another mutation, then the disease will express, which is basically called as the double hit hypothesis. The same double hit hypothesis also applies for retinoblastoma. If one mutant gene comes from the parent through germline, it is not going to cause retinoblastoma. The second mutation, if it occurs sporadically during the lifetime, then the together can lead to the development of the retinoblastoma. Now, in the men's syndrome, very good. Dr. Ashwin is our new entry into the game. Knutson's double hit hypothesis it is called as. Exactly. I was thinking that word is not coming to my mind. So Ashwin has added the word Knudson. That's right. Knutson's double hit hypothesis. So I hope you all have opened your Edmodo, the new interesting community Edmodo account, and in that you have answered the polls. After this topic is over, we will go to the polling and try to debate the quiz questions. So those who have not answered, from tomorrow onwards you go to your Edmodo account. In that we will upload all the PDF files. You can post some opinions and you can exchange your phone numbers, email IDs with the other members who are all the other students in the community, and that way you can all prepare together. We can also host a lot of quizzes. We can give assignments to the students. Everything can be done on Edmodo. I am very happy it is a free platform which is available. So you have a library. You can go to the library and if you have any problem of where to identify, how to identify, we will always be more than happy to help you out how to identify the downloadables which will be available in that. So that's good. So let us prepare every day. So from tomorrow onwards we will keep more number of questions for you, more assignments for you to answer, so that there's a proactive learning. Every day there is something to solve, something to do, something to discuss. That's how the preparation should go on. Now doctor, MEN1 defect is typically on the long arm of the chromosome 11 is what you are going to remember. Menin is the gene which is involved, transcription factor JUND, J-U-N-D. It is the lack of this JUND suppression which leads to the decreased apoptosis and oncogenesis in the case of the MEN1 syndrome. Then patients who have MEN1 gene, they carry basically a mutant gene and one wild type gene, and they are typically heterozygous in nature. Then right. So this loss of this heterozygosity is the one which is called the Knutson's double hit hypothesis, responsible for the development of the multiple endocrine neoplasia. We have MEN type 2A, MEN type 2B, which are because of the red proto-oncogene which is located on the chromosome 10. So MEN1 is on 11, MEN 2A, 2B is on the chromosome 10. These numbers are very important, doctor. Frequently asked question in the tomorrow's exam. So fundamentally this red proto-oncogene is a transmembrane glycoprotein is what you need to fundamentally remember. Then why some people have MEN 2A, some have got MEN 2B. 2A is the mutation in the red proto-oncogene in its extracellular domain, and 2B is in the intracellular domain, hence we have MEN 2A and 2B separately and differently. Now doctor, MEN type 1, what is the most important thing that you need to remember? Tumor in the pituitary, tumor in the parathyroid, tumor in the pancreas. What is common between all the three? All the three are centrally located organs in which you are having the tumor is what need to be remembered. Then what is MEN type 2A? In 2A you have pheochromocytoma. 70% of people present with pheochromocytoma. You have got Cushing's, and thyroid is involved because of the medullary carcinoma of the thyroid, and parathyroid is present in about 60% of people, and there is a parathyroid hyperplasia. The combination is type 2A. Then in type 2B, all the features of type 2A will be there along with Marfanoid habitus. They are very tall and lanky people, type 2B. And they have intestinal and visceral ganglioneuromas. And they do not have hyperparathyroidism. That is the difference between MEN type 2A and 2B. And the lumpy, bumpy neuromas are typically located on the lips and the tongue in the case of the MEN type 2B. So type 1, type 2A, type 2B, you need to 100% remember. Now in this I will tell you what is a tricky question of the entrance exam. Many times we fail to answer. The most common out of all in case of MEN type 1 is which one? Is what examiner will ask. In MEN type 1, 95% is parathyroid is the most common presentation. Then in MEN type 2A, 70% have pheo, 60% have parathyroid hyperplasia. Then another common question is, MEN type 2B may what is not there which is there in type 2A? You must be very sure to say, there are visceral ganglioneuromas but not hyperparathyroidism is what you have to fundamentally remember. Now, this is an example, men type 2B. The lumpy, bumpy neuromas of the mucosa are a very, very classical feature in case of the men type 2B is what need to be remembered. Now, that lanky barphenoid habitus of the person along with the lumpy, bumpy neuroma. Who is this patient, doctor? Men type 2B is what you are going to remember. So, how do we clinically manage a patient of MEN syndrome? In case of MEN 1, we do 4-gland parathyroidectomy, which is usually recommended, and the main idea is not resection. The main idea is screening. Screening in the asymptomatic patients who are the probands. That means their first cousins are detected with MEN syndrome. They need to be carefully followed whether they are developing any of these endocrine problems. Screening is the buzzword. For the screening for type 1, which organ do you screen? Hyperparathyroidism is usually the first manifestation. That's the reason serum calcium is the screening test of choice in case of the MEN type 1 syndrome is what need to be remembered. And in the case of type 2, the medullary carcinoma of the thyroid is a very well-known association. So that is the reason if the MEN type 2 chromosome number 10 if it is found in the person defective, then even in the childhood only prophylactically there is a thyroidectomy which is being carried out. That's a point of interest. Similarly, calcitonin is an important tumor marker to follow up for the presence of the medullary carcinoma of the thyroid. And FEOs are also very common in MEN type 2. That's the reason you need to do metanephrine and catecholamine as an important screening test. So this is all the story about multiple endocrine neoplasia. For the tomorrow's entrance, you need to be 100% sure about, doctor. Now, we have the next important entity, which is the Wilson's disease, which you should not basically do a mistake. So what is Wilson's disease? What are the 10 points that you need to know? 10 buzzwords that you need to know when you go to the tomorrow's entrance exam. First, you must know how is copper managed in our body. The dietary copper is normally absorbed from the stomach and the upper small intestine, and it is transported to the liver, loosely bound to the albumin, and there it is incorporated with the apoceruloplasmin, and ultimately it will form the ceruloplasmin, which is a glycoprotein which is produced in the liver and secreted into the blood. So this is how the copper is handled by the ceruloplasmin. And whatever that copper which is not bound in this form is typically excreted in the bile, and it is excreted into the feces. So what is the main problem in the case of the Wilson's disease? Typically, there is a deposition of the copper because it is not properly handled by the ceruloplasmin because of a problem of integration of copper into the ceruloplasmin. Normally, copper's purpose is it need to get married to the ceruloplasmin and live a happy life. So here the copper is no more married to the ceruloplasmin because ceruloplasmin is not available. So in these people, that unmarried copper will go and deposit and destroy every organ, the liver, the basal ganglia of the brain, and also the cornea. It is a potentially treatable entity, and all young people with liver disease. So patient will say, no alcohol, sir, no hepatitis virus infection, sir, nothing is there, but suddenly there is a development of a liver disease. They all need to be screened for a potential possibility of the Wilson's disease. So what is Wilson? It is autosomal recessive disorder. Copper transporting ATPase is the gene which is on the chromosome number 13, and like any other autosomal recessive disorders, consanguinity, those communities, consanguinity, wherever it is very high, there is a high incidence of autosomal recessive disorders. Another favorite question of the examiner. between autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, which is associated with consanguinity, that is father's sister's daughter is treated as a wife, whereas a father's brother's daughter is a very holy relationship of being a sister. So consanguinity is the one which will perpetuate the autosomal recessive disorders to flourish, is what need to be remembered. So in this, the main problem is, in Wilson's, there is a failure of incorporation of that copper into the proceruloplasmin. If the proceruloplasmin is not wedded with copper, then the serum ceruloplasmin levels will be very low, and the low serum ceruloplasmin is a problem in about 80% of the people, is what need to be remembered. Now, if you look at the pathology, there is no finding in the liver under the slide of the microscope, which you can say is a pathognomonic finding of Wilson. There is no such finding. Typically, copper will go and stain the periportal distribution, but this is an unreliable sign. Basal ganglia are damaged and there is a slow cavitation in the basal ganglia. That's the reason all tremor and other disorders will be there in the patients of Wilson's. The kidney will show tubular degeneration. Now, what are the important clinical features? Generally, pediatric patients, will they go to neurologist due to tremor, or will they go to hepatologist for the liver dysfunction? Will they go to psychiatrist because of the problems of psychiatry? Between the three, who will first detect a Wilson's child? It is the hepatic problem with which the children present. If he is able to grow from a child to become a young individual, overcoming the liver problem, then he will end up to a neurologist because the tremor, dysarthria and involuntary movements. Then how is the liver involvement? There can be acute hepatitis episodes, there can be fulminant hepatic failure like episodes, there can be chronic hepatitis like picture, cirrhosis like picture. All these are the problems in the case of the Wilson's. So in summary, this is a very important pictorial which you can remember in relationship with the Wilson's disease. Typically in Wilson, there is a proximal renal tubular dysfunction, there can be cardiac involvement, there can be hemolysis, and the bone can get involved with arthritis and rickets. There can be development of hepatomegaly, jaundice, acute hepatitis, fulminant hepatic failure, etc. And in the CNS, there can be dysarthria and excessive salivation, mask-like faces, dysphagia, etc. And in the eye, you have the Kaiser-Fischker rings. A classical pictorial that makes you to not forget about the manifestations of the clinical manifestations of the Wilson's. Now, a very, very specific sign in case of Wilson which you should not forget is the Kaiser-Fischker ring. So, what is the common question in the entrance? Where is the deposition of that all copper? Copper deposits in the Descemet's membrane in the cornea. And it appears like a greenish brown pigment in the corneoscleral junction. Slit lamp examination is the best way to detect it. And if it is a young child, then Kaiser-Fischker may not be there. So the lack of the Kaiser-Fischker is not against Wilson. In children there may be Wilson but no Kaiser-Fischker. So this is a classical example of that brown ring Kaiser-Fischker. Slit lamp is basically required to basically appreciate the Kaiser-Fischker ring. Now, if you evaluate a patient with a Wilson, what is a very, very important part of the evaluation? Very good. I think Ashwin is brimming to attack the day after tomorrow's exam. So that's how we get charged. And let me tell you, when you join a coaching or a mentoring session with us, it is not our contribution as a teacher. It is your own classmates as a group are the main contributors to inspire you to prepare every day and then ultimately win the exam. So that is the reason Edmodo is a community where you can be able to all join into a common class of Murali Bharadwaj, and you can have the internal discussions and exchange of materials and popping up of quizzes, cross-twittering the questions between each other, and then competing with the assignments, and that is how the entire preparation goes on. So that's the reason it is no more, I was reading somewhere, it is no more the world which is alone, said an old man who is about 80 years, because he is a part of the Facebook. So the modern cloud-based platforms can be better used for preparing together. So that's the purpose of Edmodo. So I hope everybody gets that Edmodo account of our community and then can be able to interact and exchange is the whole idea. Now doctor, if you look at investigations, the serum copper and ceruloplasmin are typically reduced. Urinary copper is increased. So normally levels is less than 40 micrograms, 100 to 1000 micrograms in 24 hours is a very high value. Then liver biopsy. So this is one of the favorite question of the examiner. Which investigation you want to depend on in order to make a diagnosis of Wilson? Very fundamental question, many times asked in the entrance. Is it urinary copper? Is it ceruloplasmin levels? Is it the liver histology? Is it the copper levels in the liver? So what is your diagnosis? The diagnosis depends on the measuring the amount of the copper in the liver. If it is more than 250 micrograms per gram of the dry weight of the liver, then it is a very, very important pathognomonic feature in the case of the Wilson's disease is what need to be remembered. So this is a typical MRI picture where you can be able to see that liver which is being laid with the toxic doses of the copper is how it is basically looking like. Now hemolysis can be there, anemia can be there, and whenever you are suspecting you can also do the genetic screening. Now comes one of the favorite questions of our neurology professor. Whenever in MD we used to walk into the neurology, his first question is this radiograph, this picture. If you look at this film, what is this reminding you, doctor? So typically it is a case of, can you attend? Yeah. So typically what you can see here is a panda, Kung Fu panda. So what is this appearance typically called in the Wilson's disease on the MRI brain? This is called as, due to the cavitation, it looks like the eyes of the Kung Fu panda. So this is typically called the panda sign. In the case of the Wilson's is what you have to fundamentally remember. Now, how do you treat a case of Wilson's is very important. Penicillamine is the one, and you basically monitor the urinary copper levels, and penicillamine is a dirty drug. Lot of side effects. Patient really doesn't enjoy. So what are the main complications of penicillamine? Skin rashes, leukopenia, the skin changes and the renal damage are the ones which need to be basically remembered. Then suppose if the patient is unable to tolerate penicillamine, is there any alternative drug that you can be able to administer? Yes. Trientine and zinc acetate. One of the favorite MCQ in the tomorrow's exam. Trientine and zinc acetate are the ones which are used in the patients who can't tolerate the penicillamine, is a very, very important point to be remembered. And all the siblings of the proband of the index case, they need to be evaluated. They need to be evaluated for the ATP7B mutation is what need to be remembered. Now, what's the prognosis in a patient who has got the Wilson? Neurological damage, if it develops, then any amount of treatment is ridiculed. So that's the reason the damage is permanent. And if there is a fulminant hepatic failure, or if there is a decompensated cirrhosis in Wilson's, that becomes an indication for the liver transplantation is what need to be remembered. So with this we come to the end of the very important topic, that would be the Wilson's disease. So now doctor, it is the time that we take up the Edmodo, whatever the polling that you have done, Dr. Ashwin, Tejus, Dr. Neena, all our online community is going to give the active answers for these questions. So, can you open the Edmodo? It is already on? Very good. So, this is my teacher account in the Edmodo. Let me take up question after the question to see how you have answered. Okay. Is it not in the same order? I need to go to last. So where is the last? This is the last. But this is not the one which is there in my. Okay, it is starting from the hemochromatosis question. In the PowerPoint it is second one. So nobody answered this question. But I doubt students can see the visibility is not there, right? Students are unable to see. Huh? Okay, if you refreshed. That's the reason it is not showing. Okay, okay. Oh, but this is not my first question. This is. Okay, we need to click on more. Okay, okay. But is there any way that we can enlarge this? So that students can see? No, I don't think students can see this one, right? Okay. Control plus. Control plus, will it make it bigger? Just check that. Control plus. Fahima is suggesting. So just bear with me because this is a small experiment, whether directly we can work from this screen instead of the PowerPoint screen. That's what I am trying to do. Control plus, very good. Wait. That's good. Our students are very tech savvy, sir. One more control plus, please. Put one more control plus. Very good. Any one more control plus? Excellent. So that's called as good students make good teacher. Just control minus, can you come just a small one level less? Right. I think now this has got a better, slightly better visibility. Okay, not bad. I think this is not bad. What is the Edmodo group code? You can tell Jubair want to have the Edmodo group code. Oh, okay. Just bear with me. The okay, I think this is a reasonable size of the, sir, we can browse Edmodo in another tab. That's also a good idea. Tara is proposing, they can also parallelly on their screen can go into the alternative one. Very good. I mean, they can toggle between their own screens between Edmodo and this presentation. Okay. At least now let us conduct the show. Okay, doc. Rapid infusion of insulin causes. 5 people have voted for hypokalemia and 1 person has voted for hyponatremia. Now, doctor, who is that 1 person who has voted for hyponatremia? Can you be able to punch I am the one into the chat window so that we will congratulate them? Very good. Nina says on the alternate window they can keep toggling. That's good. So you can see popular answer is hypokalemia and the correct answer is also hypokalemia is what you have to basically remember as one of the important complications, because insulin will make the potassium to move into the intracellular environment and that lead to the development of the hypokalemia, and you need to be very, very careful about. Now, doctor, we'll go to the second question. Okay, second question, Ajao. That's good. Now, hemochromatosis, what is true about it? There are 2 votes for option A, that it is genetically heterogeneous. There is 1 vote for the phlebotomy, and nobody said it is more common in females. I am very happy that you all remembered that it is more common in the case of the men who are not menstruating and not in the case of the women. That's good. But what is the correct answer between the 3? Majority have voted for A. Is it the most correct answer? Absolutely right. It is genetically heterogeneous is the correct answer, which you need to remember. And hemochromatosis is not fully penetrant. That's what you need to remember. It is not completely penetrant. And it can very much be treated by phlebotomy, which you should not basically forget. Now, let us go to the next question. Serum fructosamine. Serum fructosamine. It is used in all except what? Yes. Serum fructosamine can be used in all except what? So what is your answer? Predominantly 3 people voted for screening diabetes and 1 person voted for rapid change in diabetics treatment, and 1 vote is for monitoring short-term control, and only 1 vote for screening for diabetes in pregnancy. So, anybody would like to give a confident vote? You can type into the chat window. what is your answer? Into the chat window you can type. Then we can take a debate on that. So we need to remember that the predominant answer A, that it can be used for screening of diabetes, is the false statement. Is what need to be remembered, because it has got a very high false positive rate and it can't be used for screening. Excellent. A wonderful response from Dr. Ashwin. That's good. Now, doctor, the next important question. Yes, now comes our favorite question. Wilson's disease, all except, you can see 5 votes are for the Wilson's disease, answer C. That urinary excretion less than 100 is except about Wilson. That's what we discussed now. That the urinary copper will increase, which is very important diagnostic feature in the case of the Wilson. So this question doesn't deserve any further discussion because all of you voted correctly is what you have to basically remember. Now let's take up the next question. This is an interesting and a slightly challenging question, which is not a true statement. 60%, 3 votes are there. Don't worry. Shortly, a lot of our students are going to start voting for the quiz, polling for the quiz. Before the start of the class, we will have 100 votes, 300 votes, 500 votes like that. Then we will have more fun in learning and remembering it in the tomorrow's real exam. So, which is not true. Majority thought Williams syndrome, precocious puberty, mental retardation, obesity is not a true one. About 1% thought in the absence of sunlight, daily requirement of the vitamin D as 400 to 600 as a wrong statement. Now comes a very important challenge. What is the correct answer? Predominantly what people voted, where we got 3 votes, is the correct answer. Williams syndrome is not that. What is Williams syndrome? Typically it is a chromosome number 7 which need to be remembered, and they have a distinct facial appearance in the Williams syndrome. They have hypercalcemia, neurodevelopmental problems will be there, and they will have a long philtrum, classical appearance of the Williams, which you can see, and the option A, precocious puberty, they are not associated with the Williams. But the second is correct statement. Absence of sunlight is an indication for the requirement of 400 to 600. So who is that famous participant who has given that one single vote for the sunlight question? Can you be able to commit it online so that we try to celebrate the occasion of your wrong answer? That's good, no problem. Right or wrong, to do an assignment, to do a quiz, to do a polling, to finish few concepts every day, that is going to be the philosophy of our winning formula for our tomorrow's exam. That's good. Now, the next important question. You want to differentiate insulinoma and sulfonylurea related hypoglycemia. Predominantly people have answered it as plasma C peptide, which looks very reasonable. And somebody said, why don't you do plasma sulfonylurea directly? Why all this tension calculate? So, what is the best answer? Question number 6. What is the best answer? One big clap, in fact, will go to those 2 people who have correctly answered plasma sulfonylurea levels. That is the answer for this question. So, at least now Ashwin is one of those 2 people who answered it as D. Anybody else who answered D? Who else has answered question number 6D? Will get a very big clap. Now, the Yes. Now, the next question. Yes. With regard to the treatment of the hypothyroidism in a patient with ischemic heart disease, what is a true statement? How do you want to administer the levothyroxine? Very good. Fahima is that me, sir, for the earlier question. One big clap to Fahima. Now, you need to give the answer for the next question. Question number 7. Low dose levothyroxine, is it required for those who are having heart disease? All the 5 have voted as the consultant cardiologist in charge. So, what is the correct answer, doctor? 100%. All the 5 are correct. So, we have no underprivileged audience who thought other than A. 2 minutes will be out of video, doctor, to take a backup. So, just bear with us.